Boots O'Neill is a legendary cowboy who's 93 years young and still ranching every day on the infamous 4-6's ranch. That's right, he punches cows every day, and that beef is available to you at 46steak.com. Use code DALE for a limited time to on orders 50 and above. Maybe get some free shipping. Get that beef direct to your door from the 4-6's ranch. Also, check out rodeotime.com for a deal you can feel. Hey, you ain't no cowboy otherwise, old son. I'm Dale Brisby. Let's hear from Boots.
I didn't run for anything. And then my daughter checked into it. She's a little more into this, and they told her that I in a nationwide deal for the most popular old-time cowboy or something like that. You may know more about it than I do.
I saw it. I think I voted for you one day. It was on Western Horseman.
Yeah, and they said that I was in the contest, and they told me as with Red Steagall and Ty Murray and guys, and I thought, well, who in the hell's going to vote for Boots? They don't know who he is.
Dang.
You know, but then that lady called my daughter and said, they're in a runoff. The thing's over, and there's a runoff between Ty Murray and Red Steagall and Boots.
Wow.
And then we hadn't heard, and my daughter said they called her and told her it was over and that we can't tell you who won, but your dad did good. And they announced it in the November, I think they said, issue of the Western Horseman.
You've been on the cover of that a few times, haven't you?
Pardon?
You've been on the cover of that a few times.
Yeah, over the years. But the first time I was ever on it was back in the 60s. I showed a photographer how to take a coke battle and knock a grub out of a horse with it. A grub in his back.
Oh, yes, sir.
I'd take a hot rag with hot water on it, squeeze it, and hold it right over that, and then put that Coke bottle right over it and hit it, and sometimes that grub will hit the bottom of that Coke bottle. But if you ride him and kill that thing in him, then you got to have surgery to cut it out, or there'll be a knot there. But we don't have them in them anymore. I don't know. I guess modern stuff they've done, it's kind of, but we used to, like, I was running the bronc pen there at Wagner's, and I'd have 5 men riding 40 broncs, and you'd get grubs in 2 or 3 of them's back, and you just had to turn them out. But we learned to do that with a Coke bottle, and I could get 90% of them. Just put that over that grub and that worm would shoot into that bottle.
Like a pimple.
Yeah.
I bet that was relief for the horse.
Yeah. I imagine it was.
Didn't y'all have screw worms back in the day?
Oh, God, yeah. I've spent days and days, and looked like we may start again. Then I was a brand inspector for the cattle raisers, and I went to a lot of meetings when they started that. They sent me to places like a little farm community out of Lubbock to talk to the young farmers what they could do to help doing that and stuff. I really didn't think they could do it either, but they did. And now we're in a deal that we're going to have them back if we're not really careful. I want to tell you, if they get most of the guys like yourself working and cowboy and riding and don't have no idea what it's like. You just leave day in and day out carrying screwworm medicine tied behind your saddle in sacks and have 2 or 3 pegging string and a rope. Wild cattle like Wagner's, you couldn't ride up to a herd and see one, but you could jump a bunch and get them running and then circle around where you knew they was going to cross the creek or something. You sit there and you could smell case worms in them, and then you could run up on them, figure that out, and catch him. And I've rode up on, not once, but a good many, a calf down in the bottom of a wet little draw, and you could hear him going, bleh, bleh, and get down there, and he'd be a solid thing of worms the size of that calf, just a mass, and you'd kill him, get down and kill him, and
Dang.
and he'd be totally covered in them, in them worms.
Because he was a newborn? And
No, it might be a 400-pound calf.
Oh, even the
that
big
they
ones.
just eat up before he could get and had him down, and any scratch, just a tiny scratch on a horse or a cow or little calves would get them in their navel when they was born because there's blood there, and they'd get in their mouth, trying to suck and bump in their mouth and get a little bloody place, and they'd get worms in the gums, God, that's terrible. And horses and little farmers that had them 20 cows, they had to have somebody doctoring worms in them or they'd eat them. Anything. And we at Wagner's, we had 14,000 cows, and we'd start branding in April and dehorning and cutting the steers. And we'd leave horns on the heifers. And then when the worms hit, we'd quit dehorning and keep cutting them because we watered all them cattle in dirt tanks, and them calves would go stand in them tanks in the water and it drowned a lot of them worms out of them in their bags. And I remember in 51, we was branding at the matadors, and we're in a 300 section pasture, and we just lap over, no fences, and brand the herd, and we branded them right where we held them up. The hood'd come down there in a wagon team, bring the branding outfit, and we'd brand, and we'd just branding along, and the worms got so bad they had us to stop and start back, and we'd make them drives and hold them up and just rope the worms out of them and doctor them. 'Cause they just eat them. But
I guess it maybe helped y'all make a lot of good horses.
right. And they'd encourage men doctoring worms by themselves out on the range to use a neck rope, because you'd catch a lot of falls. And let me see if this is important. Yeah, I got to take it.
You bet.
That's my daughter.
You bet. Go ahead.
Yes, honey, how are you? Well, they got me wrapped up here, and we're doing an interview that'll make me famous. Okay, thanks for calling. Bye. Did you know, I don't understand. My daughter tells me that it's Facebook and all of that, but see, I carry a flip phone, and I don't even take pictures with it, so I don't know how people claim, I get, that's like people at the sale tell me this from Florida. They come to the sale, and I told my wife on the way out there, if we get to see the 4.6s and maybe if we get a chance to buy us a horse and meet Boots, that'd be the deal. How would they even know who Boots was? But
yeah, that dang internet.
Yeah, they up there Saturday night had 500 people in that with a black tie deal. Ladies is dressed, and now old Justin, what's his name, and works for Cowboy Channel.
Oh, yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, he was the MC, but 2 or 3 times I wouldn't even be listening. And Kirsten would say, "Looky, Boots, he just said we need to be aware that Boots is in the building." And then she showed me it was on Facebook that Boots was at the meeting. I don't know how and what. That's totally foreign to me. I don't.
Well, I think people are fascinated that you're able to cowboy for so long.
Yeah, that's the one. I think a lot of them do talk about that. See, I went to work pretty steady in 48, and then in 49 went on steady by the month there at JA's for $90 a month, and that wasn't just the kids' wages. All the men was getting the same thing, $90, and we worked 2 and 3 months at a time without a day off. And I don't ever remember anybody saying anything about it or hollering. They was, I look at like they hard out to work, and we worked every day. And once in a while, they'd just pull up and stake the tent down and let us go to town or something. But
was that Clarendon?
Yeah.
You'd go to
That's
Clarendon?
in the Palader Canyon. And if we got 2 days off, we'd catch a bus and go to Amarillo and drank a lot of beer and stuff. There's a bar, the Turf Bar was right across the street from a Amarillo Hotel. And see the difference in now. The Amarillo Hotel was a swanky deal and one of the classiest places in Amarillo, there on 3rd and Polk, had 2 or 3 cattle company offices inside the lobby, and it wasn't unusual at all to go in there, like if you was going to get a room or go up thing, and there'd be a bedroll and saddle laying there against the wall where some cowboy was looking for a job. And now if you used to drag a bed and saddle in the lobby of that thing, they'd put you in jail.
Well, you probably don't go to Amarillo to drink beer on the weekend very much anymore.
I don't go to Amarillo, period, now. I can't. My driving has kind of slipped a little. I've still got my license and could go anywhere. I just get sleepy driving, run off the road 2 or 3 times, and so they about grounded me. Somebody takes me anywhere I need to go now.
Do you think you've been more miles horseback than you have driving?
Oh, God, I imagine, yeah. I worked several years that's all we done was ride a horse. We didn't do nothing else other than just rounding and working. They didn't own a trailer. They didn't own a pickup. I worked for the JAs when we had 10 or 12 camps and kept the chuck wagon out. What determined it, we'd pull out along in April. If it rained enough, the grass started because we rode the horses on grass, see. And then in the fall, long first 10th of November, grass start turning brown, and you could tell your horses is getting weak while we'd pull in. But all them outfits, you fed the horses, and a lot of people don't even know what. When we fed the horses, you'd have like 12 horses to a man in a mount. But when you cut the feed horses along in November, they'd usually tell you to cut 3 old horses at a bronc. Their JAs, that bronc would be a coming 5-year-old. See, because we didn't break them till they were 4. And
why's that?
Hell, they didn't feed them. They turned them out in the Palader Canyon, and we'd gather them. I broke them 3 winters, 50 head, the 4-year-olds. And 51, 52, and 53, I broke 50 head every winter, me and my brother Wes. And we just rode them. And they'd never been other than roped and tied down and cut and branded. We'd 4-foot them and tie them down to put a halter on them. Not to do anything, but just get a halter. He'd try to bite you, squeal when you was rubbing him there. Attaboy. And we'd let him up and then saddle him and ride him. We didn't know, and that's the way we was taught to do anything. You know, we didn't use Dusty. Noticed I was showing him some old pictures. He said, "Y'all didn't even have a saddle blanket." I said, "No, it's hard to keep a blanket straight and get a saddle on him with his foot tied up and hobbled and him trying to bite you. And we just throw the saddle on and cinch him up." I wouldn't want to do my saddle that way now, my lining and stuff. But we'd ride them the first 2 or 3 saddles before we put a blanket on. I'm careful telling it when I talk at some little deal or something, because people have a hard time believing we brought them things in there, and we'd 4-foot him, put a hackamore on him, and then drag him out there and stake him to a rock on a 30-foot rope and leave him that evening and night and bring him in the morning, drag him in the round corral and dally to that old post in the middle of a round corral, but you couldn't get up and put a rope around his neck like to tie a foot up. We'd plait a big snap in the end of a stake rope and then move down it about 4 feet, and we'd have an old iron ring about that big around. We'd got off an old harness or a wagon, tie a granny, not half granny, and then you could coil that up and you'd get pretty proficient at it. And that big steel hook on the end, you could throw that over his neck and then whip this bottom, and that hook would lay over it, and then you could reach out there in the length of my arms, and that was 1.5 feet from you, or 3 feet from him, hook that snap, and then you had a deal around his neck, and we'd tie his foot up, saddle and ride him right then. And some of them, if we couldn't let it down, we'd get on, get squared away, and then lean over and undo that snap. It'd come over the top. I wouldn't want to do that now, but most of them would buck, but not they'd be give out, and there's 4-year-olds, but they'd never been fed no grain. They'd just run out in the canyon, and nobody fed them. Nobody checked the water. They couldn't break the ice in the winter. And that's just about 35, 40 miles from Amarillo, where they was in the canyon. But
RodeoTime.com is the only website that should exist, because it's the greatest apparel line that has ever existed. So go there now to get a t-shirt, a hoodie, a cap, a vest, whatever it is you need. Go to RodeoTime.com, old son. Ever since I started riding bulls and punching fools, I've been wearing an American hat, because I'm an American. I actually wore a different hat before that for the longest, but then my mom got a job. So wear an American hat, old son. Otherwise, you ain't no cowboy. When did the horse training change?
I was running the bronc pen at Wagner's for 10 years. From 65 to 75, I was the bronc boss, and we broke 35 or 40 3-year-old broncs every winter and sent them to the wagon. And I remember us hearing about a fellow that putting on a clinic down there by Fort Worth named Ray Hunt, and he's saddling them broncs without tying up their foot. And we had 5 or 6 men sitting at breakfast. We was listening to one. They all thought that was funny. They'd like to see him saddle one of these, but he could have, And excuse me, and we learned that. And it started, I guess, later than that, but started just changing the way they done it. And then they started breaking a lot of them at 2, like we break these at 2-year-olds, and then take it pretty easy on them through the 3rd year. when he's 4, we expect him to be pretty mature horse now. But see, we broke them at a 4, and he'd be 5 or 6 when you really got him to going good. And we've rode them, and this is the part that I've had a guy or two say, I really enjoyed that story, Boots, but I thought you embellished it a little. That really bothers me because I'll swear it's the truth, but we just ride them 5 saddles, 2 we ride him in the round corral this morning, out in the big corral tomorrow, go outside on one apiece, the next day, the next, and then we didn't have no rig or nothing. We'd drive them to wherever the cowboys were on the ranch, them 8, and then we'd come back, and next morning we'd stake 8 more, and we'd ride them the next day and ride them 5 saddles, 2 in the corral, 3 outside, and we just got $15 a head for riding them and take them to the cowboys. And we had to do 2 things, and one of these, now anybody that owned a bunch of horses would frown on their trainer doing this, but we'd put 15 or 20 of them in a big lot and get down there on a good horse and rope them. Coming out of a corner, jerk a lot of them over backwards. Whop! He'd just hit the ground, tied hard and fast. They wanted you to do that, and they wanted, when they roped him in a rope corral, to stop and turn around. And then we had to do that, and then we had to break them to hobble. We hobbled them every time we handled them. And they'd be where a cowboy out there at the rope corral, they'd lead him out. He'd put a hackamore on him and hobble him, and then saddle him, and then ride him if he could. But
that was at the JA's?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And then, and one winter, just I think about this because I left the JA's in August and went to the Matadors. And me and a boy started 35 3-year-old broncs. And in December, we rode them quite a bit and got them to going. And we stayed in a camp back there called the Bronc Camp, and just had a round corral and a big corral and an old horse apiece. We'd rope them on them. And we had a coal stove. There's no wood. This was at the upper Matadors out of Channing. They had a pile of coal out there, and we had a coal stove cook on, coal oil lamps, carried water from a windmill out there about 50 steps. And we stayed there about 4 months and rode them broncs. And we'd make a grocery list every month, what we needed. They furnished groceries, and the trucker'd come by, and we might be not there. He'd know that it was on the cabinet, and he'd go and take it to the grocery store in Channing, and the grocer knew anything the Matadors wouldn't pay for, and he just put the staples, and he fixed that box, and then the trucker'd bring it back by your camp if someday, and you come in, there's new box of groceries there. And I wouldn't do this now, and I've told one of the Matador managers in recent years this, that I had the reason I know how old I was. I had to leave and go to town when I turned 18 and register. You had to go to a post office and register that you was 18, you're eligible for the draft. And I had to go to town and register, the reason I know, but I put cheese on that list 5 months in a row, and they scratched it. I ain't bought no cheese yet. I was just being aggravating. I knew after the first time or two they wasn't going to buy no cheese. They bought flour and salt and beans and stuff like that. And we'd kill the beef and had him hanging in a tree, and we just let that rope down and cut a chunk off and cook it. had it right there in the yard of that little old house. But
I guess it was cool enough that it didn't go bad.
pardon?
I guess it was cold enough outside it didn't go bad.
Yeah, well, and if you draw it up pretty high in a tree, flies don't bother it as bad. They don't go up there that bad, you know, and it'd get a. And this was at the J.A.'s and at the Matadors. And Wagner's, we just run beef up close to the wagon. They just tell me and you, maybe the wagon boss, say, y'all catch something when we catch horses this morning that you can throw a beef up here close to the wagon and rope him. And the cook take sledgehammer out there and knock him in the head, and we'd butcher him there on the rope, see, on the hide. And we'd kill him 300 and 400 pound calves, and that way we could eat them up before they spoiled, you know. We'd eat the hind quarters first, and then if something got a little spoiled as the front quarter, we'd throw it away. But we'd hang them, had hooks to hang them on the wagon, and then every morning in the dark when we're eating breakfast, while the cook would lay a quarter of that beef on the chuck box lid and cut off what he wanted for the day, and then we'd put them and them other three, wrap them in an old tarp, and then tell 3 or 4 of the cowboys, roll your bed and stack it on that. And that kind of insulated it against the heat and stuff. And then you'd get it out after dark tonight and get to cook another. And we'd hang it on them hooks and leave it hanging out of a night. And it'd get a black, thick deal about that thick over it, and you could cut that back, and it'd just be pretty red meat in there, you know.
Dang.
And we didn't eat a lot. It's like we used to throw all the briskets away. We just kept the full quarters, and the cooks cooked most of them in steak. You know, they roast and all that. They just cut little chunks. And 2 of them outfits, and I worked for Babbitt's, and they was one that wouldn't buy bacon. They claim we're raising beef and we have to buy bacon. So we'd have beef, breakfast, dinner, and supper, you know.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
That's not bad, is it?
No, that's not bad at all. Wes was telling me how he went up to, was it Nevada?
Yeah. Him and the cowboy left the J.A.'s, an older fella, and I know him name real well. I'll think of it in a minute, but they went in an old coupe car, had their saddles on the fenders and their beds tied on the top, and they went out there and went to work for Moffitt's, and they had 1 million acres there. Wes stayed when that old boy left, and Wes stayed there a while, and they really liked him. He was just 17, I think, but he broke some colts for them, and then we were ranching. Up until last year, we had an outfit lease north in Nevada, and I stayed out there some and there's some people there that remembered Wes as a kid when he was out there working. Moffitt's had 1 million acres there, and none of it fenced. It's all open country, you know.
Did you went up there to the place that y'all leased? Or did you go work up there?
No, I was with this outfit. We took the wagon, camped up there right 50 miles north of
Elko?
Elko, yeah, that's what I tried to say. We was 50 miles north of Elko and had a ranch leased out there. I went up there 2 or 3 times, and we took the wagon twice and have it camped up there and that's about 20, 25 head of horses. And it is all big open country, wasn't fenced or nothing. And it was pretty tough deal, and what creoles they had wasn't any of them any good. And that old boy that was running it for us, that was the native, me and him was on top of a mountain one day, Dale, and we'd tracked some cattle up there, and we hadn't seen them. And I said, well, Dan, how far can these cattle go west that we're tracking? He said, I guess to California. They wouldn't know. But I like that deal out there. It was a real good cow outfit, and you know, he'd go up there, straight horsebacking deal. You couldn't go nowhere in a vehicle or haul a horse. We'd go way up in them mountains and pick up 7 or 8 head and ooze them back down. That was a morning's deal, you know, till we'd have a trap where we was holding them till we'd get enough to brand or wean, whatever we was doing. We'd done both, branded and weaned out there. We kept it 5 years, but during that same 5, we had 2 ranches leased in Montana, and 1 in Wyoming, and 1 in South Dakota, and 1 in Kansas and Nebraska that's kind of right there on the line. And we'd go to all them things, take a truckload of horses and stay and work them, and was there. And then me and Dusty, they had an outfit on the Canadian border, and they was in trouble over it. The people that they leased it from had got in trouble with the government over some of them. They had some little farming country, and they disastered some land that they didn't plant. And the man and the woman both had big, nice house, went to the pen. And,
oh, dang.
And we had 600 cows up there. They's all over the country, got out and scattered. And I talked to one woman, said they ate every flower in this country around the houses come through. And me and Dusty went up there and gathered them up. We stayed 2 months. And
oh, dang.
We gathered cattle all over that part. Well, I drove up to the Canadian border one evening, and there's a guard. It wasn't a town, just a trailer house there. And I told that old boy, I said, I'd like to just drive in Canada and turn around, and when I get back to the bunkhouse tonight, I'll tell them guys I went to Canada today. And he said, well, I had a pistol on. He said, you can't go in Canada wearing that pistol. But he said, I'll check it and take it in the deal and then write some stuff and put it in there, and then you can make your circle. And then, but I told him I didn't want to go to that much trouble. I'd just tell them I went to the border today. But we stayed there a couple of months, and Dusty, he was young and just starting out, kind of getting started. He really made a hand.
One of these days he's going to be a good hand, isn't he?
Yeah. He's working on it, but we got along good. He was really good about we had miles of fence that'd just be 4 wires, and it'd be a stretch of it from here to the barn on the ground. Well, we wouldn't plant posts or do anything, but I'd go to town and go to Marfa, a little town on the border there, buy some of them steel posts, and Dusty could drive 2 of them, and then we'd just tie that up to it, and it'd hold string from here to the barn up. We fixed a lot of that. Got the cattle together, and then they got us some panels. We built a panel corral, and then Joe brought the branding crew up there, and we branded 400 calves there. And they lost a few cows. Had some, when we got there, nobody was taking care of them. They was just loose and scattered. And me and Dusty counted 23 bogged down and dead in the river. But one was still bawling, and Dusty shot her because we couldn't get her out, But it was a pretty western little deal, but I had a lot of fun. Me and Dusty laughed. He was young and wasn't used to having to rough it like I had been all my life, and we had this is kind of silly, a string of them paper cups, how they come in and we eat every day out there, me and him, just on the tailgate of the pickup or somewhere. And I'd first tell him, let's save these cups that we use for 2 or 3 days. We can rinse them out. We've got this one string. I didn't know you could just go buy another string. I had a grocery store there in Melton. He raised Cain about that, but we'd use them. And then when we come home, we still had about a half a string. And I've got it over there. I just kept it now in this. I think it's under the sink in my room. They've turned brown, just about a half a sack. And I tell him, I was saving these. That is in 2011, and make sure we could make the summer, and we still got them. Now there's 50 stalks of them over in the mess hall, But he was a good hand. He really did work.
What's some of the best advice you've ever gotten?
Oh.
Or maybe just some advice that stuck with you all the years?
I'd have to think a minute, but I'd have some of that. If you give me a minute here to... I was thinking the other day, a boy asked me, I had worked a lot of people and had to fire several fellas over the years for various reasons. A young guy was going to have to fire a man. He asked me if I could give him any advice on that. And I said, what I've always been told, and tell anybody when you fire a man, go fire him, tell him why you're letting him go and you're not suiting the ranch, and then get away. Don't stay for the argument. When you stay for the argument, that's usually when there's a fight, But just tell him that's it and get away. But on one of the best fellas that I worked for way back there that helped me a lot, I give him credit, was a fellow named C.H. Long, and he was kind of a legend, and he got quite a bit of photography work done later. He was a real honorable fella, and he'd tell you little things like we was trotting across the river there in the Paladur Canyon one time, seen a fresh hondo that had been cut out of a rope laying by the trail, and he just looked at it and said, Boots, I wouldn't work a young man that wouldn't slip off from rope, but I won't work one that lets me catch him. I've always thought that was pretty good. And he'd flank a calf. If you've seen a guy flank him, rut his finger, now lay there, you so-and-so. And he'd just say, just hold him, don't classify him. Stuff like that. But he was born here in Guthrie in 1910. And he was one of the best cowboys and cowmen I ever worked with. And I had to several of them guys that were good. Tom Blassingame was a good example, and he lived to be 92, and they buried him there on the rim of the canyon. And but
didn't he? When he passed, didn't he send his horse in? When he passed, didn't he send his horse in?
Well, he didn't send him. He is a batching at Camel Creek. That's in the canyon. Another funny story, a guy from Amarillo had made arrangements to meet with Tom and interview him. And he come down to the camp, and there's 7 gates from headquarters to that camp. And that guy mentioned the fact that there's 7 gates getting down here, Tom. Tom said, yeah, I failed to tell you that this is a gated area.
A gated community.
Yeah, he lived in the bottom of the Paladura Canyon. But what happened on his death, he just saddled up one morning and left to go prowl. He rode a lot of country there in the canyon. And we don't know, and nobody does. Something happened that he got off and had his horse's reins and crossed his hands and laid down. He must have been hurting, or something. And he died there, and that horse just slid them out and went back to the camp. And they couldn't get a hold of him, nothing, and so they sent a man down there, and the horse was standing outside the camp. And that is about a 75 section area but they pulled out up a trail and found him laying right there beside of the trail with his hands crossed over his chest and laying there.
Dang.
He told me that he was born in 98. And he told me 1898. And he told me when he left home, his folks had a homestead over there in the corner of Oklahoma. It was kind of a renegade. Oklahoma hadn't even claimed it or become a state yet, But they had a little homestead there and was trying to make it with a farm deal. And Tom told me he left. His dad was working on a windmill, and he said, I was 15, so that would have been in about 1913, wouldn't it, or 14. Said I told him that I was sorry I didn't want to work on a farm, plowing and stuff, and I'd like to make my living looking through the ears of a horse. And then he sat there a minute and said, I have. That was when he was an old man. He was telling me that. But my dad worked for the Matadors in 26, the upper mats, and Tom was running the wagon. And then I worked at the JA's 3 or 4 years. He was past running the wagon, but he is kind of a lead-off man. And he knew he was an expert, and we roped a lot of big steers. I mean, like this steer up here, we caught them kind of steers and tied them to a tree, and then you'd go back the next day and get him and lead him. It's far down, and you may tie him back up and water him in a creek if he drank. Usually they wouldn't drink. And we'd try to get them to where we wasn't no roads, and we'd have an old 4-wheel drive truck that they could work through the cedars and cross creeks and get where we could load him. And we'd load 2 or 3 and get him out every day, and we'd catch there all winter. We'd just catch big steers out of that canyon. You could be riding down in the bottom here, and way up there toward the rim of that canyon, it'd be a bluff 10 or 12 feet high, and right around the bottom of that, if you really looking, you could see whiteface something moving around up there, and Tom would tell you, that's no steer, and we'd see tracks at the river, and he'd say they come down here in water of a night and then go back up there in the day. We'd send somebody up above them, run them out, and when they come off down through there, we'd catch 2 or 3. I've wrote a good many, and then I went to Wagner's, and we wrote more of them there than we did. We caught them big 6 and 7 year old steers, 3 and 4 in a bunch at a time. We'd catch them, tie them to trees, and then lead them out the next day. And I remember one time the wagon is camped right along the river, and we had roped 6 big steers, 6 or 7 year old steers, and tied them to trees there along the river, because they was some good. You didn't want to tie one to just any. You wanted a good straight tree, and you didn't want no limbs or nothing that'll hang the rope. You tie him with just that much slack around it. You want him to be able to lift his head up and down, and him to go all the way around it. He'll buck and bawl and fight that, and we could hear it roar in the river, but we didn't know nothing. And they had a gigantic flood up here, and the Wichita River come down, got out of bank, and drowned 6 of them steers tied to them trees.
Oh, dang.
Yeah, for a long time I'd ride in there, and you'd go by a skeleton. It'd be just the way the water went down, and his head still tied to the tree.
Dang.
And that'd been a brutal deal for the old steers, We didn't have no way of knowing or nothing that that big a deal or is going to get out. We rode out in there stirrup deep the next morning and cut 2 or 3 loose that just lean over and cut them, and they'd leave there with you want to tie that knot around their horns in a square knot, and then just cut that rope. Well, he'd just have that with him forever then. But, and we used to, there at Wagner's, every day or two, we'd have a herd throwed together, and we'd have a 4 or 5 year old steer. He'd just break out, and we'd catch him and take the herd to him, turn him loose in a little bit. He'd break out again. Well, we'd tie a rope around his horns and then pull it down tight between the hairline and his dew claw on the front foot. So he had to turn his head down, and after about 50 steps, boy, he'd stay in there and tiptoe, hold his head down, because that gets the sore under his horns there. He'd hold it down, and then when we got to the trap, we'd have to catch him and take that off. And it was, a 5 or 6 year old steer, it is a big deal. Catch him and take it off. But we had his bukus of them. We'd have days at a time there at Wagner's. We'd have a roundup with a maverick, 3 or 4 year old maverick bull and a couple of steers, and we'd brand a couple of 4 or 5 year old cows that had calves. We'd just brand them. That's before they started the brucellosis thing. See, after they started that, if you'd just branded a maverick cow, she ain't never had the shot, and then some way wound up in a herd of shippers and they cut her, you might have to test to hold that gum side of the ranch, over it. So we quit branding them maverick cows and just let them raise the calf and live out their life there on the river, where they had to bukus of them. Golly.
There's not as many mavericks these days, are there?
No. And there at Wagner's and the JA's, we'd throw a herd together, and then you'd put, like if you had 12 or 13 men, you'd have about 5 of them. Now they just leave with a herd with a leader on it and it's open. But then you'd put 5 or 6 of us stirrup to stirrup in front and then leave with that herd. And one of them bulls would come, and boy, he'd come out of there, just be roping him out of a box as he shot through there. Put him back in there, and in a little bit here, he'd come, and he'd come again. And had an old boy work there, he'd say, just quoting this, he's a real funny guy. He'd say, and he said, "Go into the woods, Wild Bull." And he did. That bull would come out.
What was that one time somebody asked whose rope that was on there was a bull in the pen in the herd with the rope on him.
Boy said, I've heard that story, but I don't know. It wasn't where I was, but I've heard them say, "Whose rope's that on that bull?" And that guy said it's his, and he give it to him. But there at Wagner's, golly, we kept the wagon out. I went there in the spring of '55, and we pulled the wagon in the first time in the '60s. It stayed out the year around and never did pull. They'd give us 3 or 4 days off once in a while and just stretch the tent and tie it down good, and then we'd leave, and then we'd come back to the wagon and stay there at the wagon. But it stayed out the year around, and I remember talking to Tony Hazelwood, was the old single bachelor ranch manager, about us take off Saturday evening and let these old boy grabs boots. We never will be able to do all this work if we let them boys go to town on Saturday. But I remember well as in '68, I was running a crew there, and they called my wife because we didn't have a way to contact us out on the ranch. And they called my wife and told her to tell me to call the office when I come in. And I called them, and they said, it's in '68. They said, "Boots, we want you to let the crew off this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, and we'll see how it works." And it's worked pretty good because they're still doing it, but that's the first time we'd done it. We worked just like riding broncs, 5 or 6 men. We rode them broncs Sunday just like Wednesday, you know. And talking about the screw worms, I got a good one on that old Mr. Hazelwood. He is a legend of an old bachelor. But that, you know, when we was finishing up the eradication of screw worms, well, then you'd just find something that was, you didn't know if it was a screw worm or a magnet or something. Well, they had little paper boxes about like a hot dog. They'd furnish him that you could gather him up and put him in that and ship it to Mission. That's where that plant was that eradicated it sterilized the males. And then they'd fly over a ranch like this. If they heard that there's an area here where they screw worm, that plane that dumped 3 or 4 boxes of those sterile male flies out, and they couldn't reproduce, you know, and that's how they eradicated screw worm. But there's an old young man working for the state, and he is a young, nice guy, I'm sure, and was well educated, and he told Tony, said, "Mr. Hazelwood, we think there's male screwworm fly or two on that Soap Creek country. That is wild cow country. We just roped the calves out of there, and there wasn't no corrals. And he said, we need you to have your cowboys spray them cows to protect us on this. And Tony said, by grabs, son, by grabs was the worst thing he ever said. By grabs, son, we can probably cut that old male fly easier than we could spray them cows. I don't think that young guy even had any idea what he was talking about. But Tony said, we can go down there and cut that old male fly easier than we can spray them cows. We didn't spray nothing anyway there then, and it was pretty. Boy, it was quite. They had 800 sections there in one block, laid in 6 counties, and it was all connected through there. And I used to tell people we'd pull out Brandon with that wagon and just brand till we started weaning, and then wean till we started branding. It was, we kept. When I left in 83, moved to town, me and my wife, and bought a place up there, I had 14,000 cows on the books and had 300 saddle horses on that. We kept 200 with the wagon all the time, and then in 10 or 12 camps, 5 or 6 in each camp, was that other 100. But I had 300 saddle horses. And it was a steady job of riding.
What year did you come here?
Huh?
What year did you come here?
I came here the first of the year in 90. It leaves 35 years this Christmas, wouldn't it?
Yes, sir.
I think it would.
Yeah.
I got a watch over in my room. They give me for 30 years, and it's a Rolex set.
Yes, sir.
Dusty got his phone out the other day. We was looking at it, and he said them things could be worth $35,000-$40,000 for one of them Rolexes. He looked on the phone, but I wear it once in a while when I go somewhere. I wore it here a year or so ago. I went to Childers to a doctor over there for a little examination, and I asked him if he knew how to do what we was talking about, and he said, "Yeah, Boots, I just had that on. Wasn't thinking." He said, "I don't have a Rolex watch, but I know how to do that." I didn't think about the Rolex being a big deal, but it says on the back of it for 30 years service. Won't be any more. They said that and Doc Blodgett and his wife both got it. They said she is the only woman that ever got it. And then there's one person got it after I did, and then Ann died. And then, these people, and it's not frowning on these people or nothing. They're just, Ann was like it was part of the family, and she's doing it for that. And it's a little different now with so many people. Ann knew everybody in one of these camps and whether their kid needed some work done on their teeth or whatever, And she took me to, I've got a thing, I've seen it the other day. It's on the visor of my pickup, shows a picture of that. She took me to Fort Worth I was having trouble with this wrist and to a surgeon, and he told me to operate on the hand down in there was more articulate than operating on the brain. And I've got it on the visor of the pickup, a picture of it. Just that they went in here and cut some of that bone off, and on that main bone, that biggest one, they run a deal up it 3 or 4 inches, and then this little bone, they put a splice on it, and there's 5 stainless steel screws through there, and they show up. Well, I've been x-rayed time or two for something hurt my hand or something. They x-rayed. Doc x-rayed and said, "Boy, look here. That thing's got pins all the way to your knee." I said, "Yeah, I remember when they done that." But Ann took me down there, and I remember that guy said that Miss Marion, and y'all will know where this would be, but there's a famous hospital up north. It's real famous for surgeries, and it's in one of them states along the Great Lakes, and it's a high-tech deal. And
That's where you went?
no, he said, we sitting there, and Ann went in and sat there with me talking to this doctor, and he said, "Miss Marion, I know you have the means, and you could take him to where it's up on the Great Lakes. That's the best place in the world to do that." And she said, "He ain't a going to the Great Lakes. I had hell getting him to come down here," she said. And so they done it, but it worked good. I can't, all the old fingers now's got stiff, hard to plait or anything.
Yeah.
Can't hardly button my shirts, but
I saw Tom Morehouse was awarded the Golden Spur.
yeah, I was up there.
Did you go
was
to it?
Quite a nice deal, yeah. Tom, see, I got them the first time they gave them 6 years ago. That's for a working ranch. They give a deal, for a big rancher or somebody that's legendary in the ranching cow business. And then they started 6 years ago. I got the first one. And they give a pair of spurs and have a ceremony there for a guy that's devoted his life to taking care of livestock, a horseback. And Tom got it. He was the 6th one to get it the other night. I glad to see him get it. I told him one time I thought he'd get it, but he said he didn't think he would because he thought most of that is for a working ranch cowboy. And he said, I'm a cowboy and working, but I'm a rancher myself. So he owns his little ranch. But they give it to him, and it was a nice deal.
When was it that you said you had too much tied up in leather?
I was at 1952. Wagner's owned the north end of the Bells. A lot of people don't even know that now, but they bought that north end, 100 and something thousand acres at Mescaro, New Mexico. And they had a pretty wild deal there. They'd come down here to the lower outfit and say, "We need to send 15 horses. All you guys cut one to the New Mexico ranch." And that's all. What everybody cut. So that's all they had out there was a bunch of bucking horses. But I was there, and I was riding a bronc sitting in a round trail. And I tell people when I tell this that I wouldn't, I was wrong, and I wouldn't want young people to, nowadays, why, it would follow you. And anywhere you went and asked for a job, they'd say, "What about that deal?" But I was just sitting there on a bronc, and bobtail truck pulled up from Vernon at Mascaro, backed up to that granary, and 3 or 4 men, a couple of cowboys and another old boy, they didn't have no augers or nothing, and they just got scoops and went scooping them in that oat bin, and then they'd get down and get in there and scoop them back so they could keep scooping in. And that straw boss walked out there at that corral and said, "Boots, would you want to help us unload these oats?" And his name was Rang Thornton, an old man. I said, "Oh, Rang, I've got too much money tied up in leather to be scooping them oats." And well, he said, "Don't get mad about it." The manager was gone to a bull sale. And he just turned around and went back over there and started. But I sat there a little bit and thought, I either ought to go help unload them oats or leave one. It was about 4 o'clock in the evening. I just got down and unsaddled that thing. I had an old 41 coupe, one-seated deal, but it had a big turtle, trunk. And so I told him, I said, "Rang, just send my check, have them to send my check to Clarendon, and I'll just pull out." "Well, I wished you wouldn't leave. Bob's going to be disappointed." And I told him, "Well, I need to go or help y'all unload them oats, and I don't want to unload them oats." And I left and drove. That was 4:30 in the evening, and I got to Adrian about dark, Adrian, Texas. And I stopped there to get some gas and go in a little old cafe. It's just a one station and one cafe town. And the Matador wagon boss was sitting in there eating, and I knew him and had worked under him before. And told him what my deal was, and he said, "Well, when you left to go out there, we've still got your horses open. We haven't given to anybody. If you want to go to work, we'll go with me, and we'll go back out there after a while." And I parked my old car, loaded my bed and saddle in there, and I tell people I turned a Wagner horse loose at 4 that evening and saddled a Matador horse 4 daylight the next morning. So I never was out of work. But now you couldn't do something like that. They'd want to know where you was working before, how come you leave, and stuff like that, which is all right. But I tell a quick one on. I went in there at Mascaro one time. They had it was just a little Mexican town. And they had a little bronc riding there, and I won the bronc riding. It was just kind of a cowboy deal. And there's a bobtail truck pulled up there. It had 3 little wild, long-maned horses snorting and looking through the cracks in the. And that old boy said they bucked everybody off out there at the ranch. And I knew they was having this, and I was brought them in here to see if this guy and the guy that had the stock there would buy them. And he said, "Well, I will if somebody will ride them, and we'll see." And so I told him, I said, I don't want to flank them in a association saddle. They're wild little old horses off rank, but my saddle's in the car, and I'll just take my flank cinch hobble off and pull my flank back and ride them in that. And he said, "That's good enough." And I rode all 3 of them. They'd ride one, and they'd bring my saddle back and ride the next, then the next, and they all bucked. He bought them, and one of them little horses really cranked it up. He blowed up and turned back and kicked, and I could look at them guys in that stand above the chutes right in the eyes there at one time. But I rode all 3 of them, and the part I was going to tell, Now they give a man $50 to buck one out like that. He give me $2 a head, $6 for riding them 3 horses. $6 rode them 3 horses, and they all 3 really buck.
Don't you have a poem you wrote? A little, like a prayer?
Oh, I've got 2 or 3 of them things, but most of them are stuff like that, and I never let anybody. I've had people want to copy it, and I have wrote it down for them, but I won't let them say that that was an old 1890s trail driving song, and I took 90% of it is in it, and then I added a line or 2 and fixed me a prayer to say at these cowboy gatherings where there's a bunch. But do you want me to say it?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
It says, they say there will be a big roundup where cowboys like dogies will stand. Now they're to be marked by the rider of judgment, and he's posted and knows all brands. They say he won't ever forget you, and that he knows every action and look. But for safety, you best make sure that you've been branded and your name's listed in the Lord's tally book.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Let me tell you one I memorized. An old boy, and I don't know his name, but I know it's in Arizona, wrote it, and I left, same as that, I left out a line or 2 and added a line and made me a little thing to say that people get a kick out of. It's I wake in the morning, a cup of coffee I drink, because it seems to help me to think. Then I drink some more, 'cause it's hard to think when you're getting up at 4. If I didn't get up so early, so much I wouldn't have to drink, but then I wouldn't have time to think. That boy in Arizona wrote, and it's another line or 2 that he had in it that I didn't think fit for what I was going to use it for, so I just took it off. But
dang.
Well,
I sure appreciate you coming on.
I hope that, I don't never think I do good at something like this, because the only thing that is just like everything I've told you, like 4-footing and tying a 4-year-old horse down just to put the halter on him. People think that's BS, but we done it day in and day out, And another thing, and if I had a rope, and I'll show you one tomorrow or something, with staking them broncs, you couldn't take a chance on that. He's a 4-year-old and never been touched, And if you dallied to the horn, going to take him out there to a stake rock and lose him, we did a time or 2. It'd take 2 or 3 days to get him back. And we had a deal that we would take a shackle. You know what a shackle, and you put that shackle on the horn, and then put a half granny knot just about 10 feet from the colt, and put that shackle over that. And that makes you tied solid to the horse. And then there's 10 or 12 feet of rope dragging that's the other end of that stake rope. Well, you'd fight and wool and buck and bog and get him out there to the rock. They was just out in the pasture, them stake rocks. And then one of us, whoever wasn't on the horse with the bronc, he could tie that before, and if that bronc hit the end of it, that slide out of there and you'd have a shackle just hooked on the horn. Or we would be able, when we got it tied, slip that off the horn, and when that bronc hit the end of that rock, that shackle would go 10 or 12 feet. Sometimes we'd have to hunt it because it was brushy and grass, and hunt that shackle for a minute to go back and get another one. And we'd stake 8 of them, and every time we staked a bunch.
Yeah.
But see, the JAs at the wagon with a 12 or 14 man crew, every man there staked the horse every night that you'd ride in the morning. They issued you a stake rope when you went to work, and the horse wrangler would take care of the horses. He'd bring them in about this time every night and put them in the rope corral, and everybody, the 2 horse ropers, would catch everybody a horse they wanted for tomorrow, and you'd take him out there somewhere 100, 200 yards from the wagon and stake him by the necks, bowling around the necks and bowling around a tree. And if you stayed there, camped there 2 or 3 days, you're supposed to move that stake rock every night and stake rope, because that's all he got to eat night and morning. And the boss would, he'd fuss at somebody leaving one of them staked 2 nights in a row in the same place, because they wouldn't be nothing for that horse to eat. And then you saddle this pile there, and you go out there about 3:30 in the morning and saddle the thing and lead him up there and tie him to a tree. Sometimes hobble him as all broke to hobble good, and eat breakfast. And then we'd not having no, like we load up here in the dark and leave every morning in a pickup and go several miles, but we'd leave a horseback, and you might have to ride across there 6 or 8, 10 miles to where you was going to split up, and it's dark going across there. And somebody would strike a match and light, and then one of them things would blow up when he struck that match. It scared him, but...
Didn't you leave y'all's saddles out all the time?
Yeah, year round. A brand new saddle, you just laid it down on the ground, and it rained and snowed and wind blew. It was there, and they was never... I worked for Wagner's 4 or 5 years, one hitch there, that I never put my saddle down, just laid it down on the ground where you unsaddled him, and you'd saddle him there in the morning. And
dang.
I'll tell you all a quick bronc story, and we got another man out there we got to get, but...
Oh, he's okay.
They had a horse there. They had a guy come there at Wagner's, and he was wanting, and he'd set a tripod up in the back of a pickup and then get under a hood, and he wanted to take a picture of me riding the bucking horse. And I had a 7-year-old sorrel horse there that I was riding that would really buck, and we caught him and saddled him and led him out there, and had 2 good 6-footer. One of them was J.R. Edwards, and the other one was Cecil Bars. They got an ear apiece and just eared him, and we never moved him when I cinched him up, and I just oozed on him, and J.R. just slapped him on the nose, and boy, he did explode. It scared that old boy. He didn't get the picture. They put a picture of me on the cover, what I started out to tell you. That was a Look magazine. It was a national magazine back then, a little magazine. And I was telling my daughter about that it showed a picture of me on that horse getting ready, and they had it on the cover of the Look. But I didn't even think about getting one. And well, she wanted one for the archives, so she did a bunch of research and found a place in New Jersey that dealt in all them, and they told her they had a copy of it, and with that picture on the front, and so she bought it and has it now, but it cost her $35, and it had on the cover, it had 15 cents a cover on what it would have been if I'd have got one then.
Dang.
15 cents for a magazine, you know.
Yeah, prices have changed a lot.
Pardon?
The prices of everything have changed a lot in your
mercy.
lifetime.
Yeah, golly. First pair of boots I ever had made, Pete Borden made them there at Clarendon in 48, shop-made boot, and they were $48
Dang.
for a shop-made boot. Now a pair 700 or 800 is about as good a deal as you can get on a shop-made boot.
What year was it that you were born?
32.
1932. Dang.
Yeah.
When was the first time you had electricity?
Well, we didn't have electricity or bathroom in the house or when I left home when I was 16 and went to work for the JAs and never, I wasn't leaving because of crossways. Everybody had to go to work, and and I went to work for the JAs in July of 49, and seeing in September I'd have been 17 and worked, and then me and Wes the year before that, 48, he'd have been 15, I'd have been 16, see, coming up. Well, we broke 20 head of 3-year-old broncs for the RO ranch, and we got $20 a head, and we turned them over, and that was $400, $200 a piece. And that was truly the first time that we'd ever had any real money. Was that $200. We broke 20 head of 3-year-old. The Rose was a big outfit at Clarendon, and they had a wagon and a cowboy crew and a lot of horses and a lot of country. The Rose, see, Alfred Rove founded that thing in the 1880s, and he went down on the Titanic in 1912. He'd went to England to borrow money and get some money and stuff for the Rose. And then that family kept that thing going until the 1990s. They won the first ranch rodeo we had at Wichita Falls.
Really?
The ROs won it. They branded the RO on the left hip. And they were an old-time, really good cow outfit. And but it just kind of fell apart as heirs died off, and third and fourth generations down is raised in Dallas or somewhere that didn't know nothing about the Rose. It was right there just 10 miles out of Clarendon. JA's was on one side and the Rose on the other. And all of us worked for all of them. Like we had a string of bucking horses an old boy had there, and half of his horses in that now outfits don't want to sell to a bucking string, but half of their horses was JA broncs or RO broncs that I went to a rodeo at Stinnett. I was working for the JAs, and we worked 7 days a week. So I rode Saturday there that morning and turned the horse loose and got away at dinner and run to Stinnett, about 50 miles, and entered in bronc riding and drawed a JA horse that night, and I won second on him, and back to the ranch then and worked Sunday morning, left there at dinner and got up there, had a J.A. horse drawed that night, and I tell people I went 2 days at the rodeo and won the average in the bronc riding, and won a third and a second, and won the average. And working for J.A.'s and never did get off a J.A. horse. Rode one Saturday night and Sunday evening, and back Monday morning had one there. And I told that to Dusty the other day. We was talking, and then I told him I went to Clarendon the 4th of July, and one year, I'll put this in, kind of pulling my chain. One year I won both go-arounds and the average in the saddle bronc riding there at Clarendon. That was my best lick.
Yeah.
But I went this time, I was telling Dusty, and he gets a kick out of me telling something like, I drawed a horse called Joker, and I knew he was a J.A. horse, and I had been riding him at the ranch, but they cut him and sold him. I thought, man, I'm sitting on first place here with old Joker, and he bucked me off in the rodeo. And another horse, Dusty gets me to tell this. He thinks it's funny. I rode a bronc at Electra, and then they didn't have stuff like they do now, and it is the debate as to whether I made the whistle. He bucked me off right at the whistle, and the judges got together and talked and decided I didn't. So I walked back down there, smart aleck, to shoot, and told that old man that owned them bucking horses, I'd sure like to come down here tomorrow night and see him in my box again. And sure enough, I got there, and he was in there, and he bucked me off again. So Dusty got a kick out of me telling him that, because that little horse was a snappy little horse.
Well, what advice do you have for a young cowboy?
Well, I've always been devoted to the people that I work for, and my dad raised me and Wes to telling us that if it don't bellyache about the way the outfit's doing something, if you don't like it, leave, and they're paying you to do what you want. So I've always tried to do what the outfit wants to. And I tell young men to talk about the way that we rounded that and worked them things the other day bad. That's a bad deal, because you're working for them and they're paying you. And if you don't like it, well, you need to go somewhere else. And I've always really liked to punch cows, and I've told a rider this, and she said she had never seen anybody had a deal like that, but I mean it, and I told her that a lot of times I went to bed at night wishing I'd already slept and we was going to do what we're going to do in the morning, because I enjoyed it. And I've always thought one of them cold, blustery days trailing a bunch of bulls, that I just think when we get in tonight, you'll be warm and comfortable. And my wife, I remember one time she was in town, she knew that I really liked that, didn't care whether bad or what it was, go with the crew. And she is in town and going to stay for a day or two for something. And I called her. I got in and I said, boy, this was a tough deal today, Mom. That it was a cold, windy deal and spitting snow, and we drove a bunch of bulls right straight into it all evening. And before I finished, she blurted in and said, "You enjoyed every minute of it." She knew me pretty good, I guess, but
Dang. That's fun.
I've enjoyed talking to you guys. I hope I haven't stayed too long.
No, it's been great.
I tell I told you, you know, that back when I was the brand inspector, they sent me to a lot of meetings reference to screwworms. And we was at a meeting in Vernon. And the MC just got up there and recognized that in the audience there was an old, very distinguished, silver-haired senator, Senator Moffett. And he'd been a senator for this area for years. So he said to Senator Moffett, "We're glad to have you in here. Would you like to come up and say a few words?" And this has been 65 years ago, and I've always thought, and I need to practice it right now and get out of here. But the old man got up there and said, "Well, I don't want to get up here and just say a few words and leave you folks wondering about the degree of my intelligence as opposed to the guy that stays up here till he removes all doubt." And I've thought of that at a lot of speeches I've been at. I think if he just cut that off, it'd be. I thought of that old man. But
no, I appreciate it, Boots, very much. Thanks for your time.
I hope you can cut some of it and mark it out what you need.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to go over there and see if Kirsten will let me have one of them big peaches and go to bed.
Hey, old son, if you're not feeding every morning with a Can-Am side-by-side, then you ain't no cowboy. I got a Can-Am because I needed a reliable ranch rig that I could use every day because I don't know how to work on stuff like that. So I want something that's not going to break down ever. Get yourself a Can-Am, old son. I hope you're enjoying a ranch fuel as you're listening to this episode of Rodeo Time. Use code DALE on ranchfuel.com for 15% off, old son. Drink up and use code DALE on ranchfuel.com.